Hey, everybody. I'm Mark Fowler, and I'm your host today for Always Creating Value, which is a podcast directed to individuals who step out there and are always focused on the things they can do today and tomorrow with their businesses, with their lives, with their families, creating value in a sense that we're not focused on so much the negative or what went wrong or whatever, but focused on how are we going to keep going forward and moving forward for the betterment of all. And the individual today, Rinaldo Brutoco, who's the president and co-founder of the World Business Academy, is a great example. I've known Rinaldo for many years, and I was initially, in the early days, one of the members, and I'm now a member again. It's a worthy organization. Now, how do we get here? Well, I decided after all many years of working in the re-engineering business, helping business turn around and grow, merge, a lot of work in the succession planning area, we found that the individuals that made the biggest difference and the projects that we did to move those projects down the road in very successfully revolved around those people that were always there to show up with some new idea, the energy to move it forward. What are we going to do today? We had a great day yesterday, and what are we going to do today? How do we advance that? How do we advance that process? And one of my goals is to get people to see the audience, whoever sees this, to get an understanding that exceptional situations and exceptional people can show up anywhere and anyhow. And it really is a matter of, I think in our pre-interview with Rinaldo, he said vision and confidence. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about as well. We've worked with all kinds of different companies from different sizes, different shapes, different industries, different professions. And this idea of consistently creating value has hung in there. So we're gonna have Rinaldo introduce himself, and then we're gonna go into some questions and conversation between he and myself, and then we're gonna open it up to questions. Rinaldo, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you. You want me to introduce myself?
Yeah, we would like to know overall. I mean, I know it would take just an hour to begin to inventory all the things you've done and all the presentations you've had. I'm a big fan. My wife can't wait to go to another presentation of yours. So,
well, I tell you that the way I describe myself to people is I'm a lot like the movie Forrest Gump, except I'm absolutely astounded that that's the picture of my life that has emerged over all these years. And I honestly believe it's less about me, and it's more about getting out of the way and letting what's trying to happen with whatever skill we can bring to bear as a midwife. So the best concepts, the best consciousness, the best outcomes in business and in society can occur. So to me, I look at who I am as a function of how well I can achieve getting out of the way and midwifing some of these beautiful babies I've had the just unbelievable delight to be present at as they get birthed.
Well, I know getting out of the way is an important ingredient, but what is it that what do you do to get that fire going? Let's go a little bit to give the audience a little bit of idea of the magnitude of some of the things you've done. When you say the World Business Academy, sometimes you put a question mark comes into your head, but then when you start digging into the members and the things you've accomplished, and then if you look at Just Capital, and then if you look at that airplane, like it's not an airplane, but the Clipper there, back in the background there, those are the major things. So we fill in a little bit
Sure.
about those.
Yeah, let me suggest this. The Academy was formed in 1986. It came out of a series of 18 months of meetings that we had at the Stanford Research Institute. When we started it, it was because I had given to my friend and who became my partner, Willis Harmon, an assessment of what I thought needed to happen if we were going to have society change fundamentally in a way that was more supportive of life in all forms, not just human life, and therefore not only social improvement, but also the biosphere, And in that conversation with Willis, I articulated the tripartite mission of the Academy, which I'll repeat in a moment. And he was really excited by it. And he said to me that evening that we first chatted, he shook my hand and he said, well, why don't you do what you just said? And I said, well, Willis, if someone of your intelligence, humility, capacity, commitment, if someone like you was to join me, I would. He said, I'm in. So we shook hands. Well, he then arranged, because he was the chief futurist in residence for 16 years at SRI. At that time, Stanford Research Institute was the premier think tank on the planet. In fact, Willis was an electrical engineering professor at Stanford and was the first person in the world, and he did it at Stanford, to teach artificial intelligence. People don't know that about Willis. He was the first person to ever teach it. And so SRI noticed him, pulled him out of Stanford University, and made him the chief futurist in residence for 16 years at the Stanford Research Institute, which was, for all those years, the most powerful think tank in the world. I share that story with you because we met one day a week and one day a month for 18 months to decide what it is we could do as a group to activate what I had articulated the first night we met, which was the mission of the World Business Academy. And that tripartite mission, very simply, is this. Our job is to shift the consciousness of the existing business leadership from that of a predator to that of a steward, because you act differently if you think you're responsible for the outcome, and stewards do. The second part of the tripartite mission was to shift the consciousness of young people going into business, particularly into our graduate schools of business, so they could see themselves entering a noble profession rather than the jungle. Because you give yourself permission to do things in the jungle that you just don't do in the temple. So the idea that they were entering a noble profession would help ground them, we felt, in behaviors that would be life-supporting and sustaining rather than life-threatening. The third part of the mission was to shift the consciousness of the public at large so it would put its money where its deeper values, not its transitory values, not its shallow values, but its deeper values. And once the public did that, we were convinced that business would turn on a dime. So that was the founding trilogy, tripartite mission statement. And we started having these meetings once a month for 18 months. And we were exploring, how does one try to execute that mission? By the end of the 18 months, several things were clear to us. Number one, Stanford Research Institute could not be our home, although they were desperately trying to recruit us. They wanted us to become basically a big part of their outward-facing activities. That was not possible. And we explained why it was not possible ultimately to, he was called, Bill Miller was the CEO of Stanford Research Institute, and it fell on me to be able to provide Bill with the final report of our group after 18 months, at which he served us the same Mandarin chicken salad lunch every single time for 18 months. No innovation there at all. And my job was to tell him, again, this was in 1986, so we had to use overhead celluloid slides, right? We didn't have PowerPoints, to tell him why we couldn't be part of Stanford Research Institute, and that we had decided to go on and to form our own nonprofit called the World Business Academy. From that day forward, we ended up having a dialogue which started in the 18 months and has become the lodestar, if you will, that has guided us ever since. So if you take that tripartite mission and you really get into it, what are you really saying? The mission of the Academy is to spiritualize business. And we felt that it was very hard to talk about spiritualizing without it being confused with religion, which it is not. But it is very much in the nature of a more esoteric organization, which saw spiritual as its core rather than material as its core. And we felt that that would set it off against every other business institution, because all other business institutions see themselves as material. With that in mind, we decided to launch, and we did launch the Academy in 1986. Now, the Academy has had three operational divisions, if you will. Number one, being a think tank and publishing. So we've published dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of articles and dozens of books on numerous subjects. I myself have published 4 that I've written, and at least maybe 30 articles, maybe more than that, 30 articles plus a daily newspaper column for the last couple of years. So we publish a tremendous amount of information as a think tank, and we're proud of our history as a think tank, and we will continue to be a think tank indefinitely. The second part of our charter, as it were, was to be available to particularly nonprofits, but individuals as well, who were willing to step forward and use their skills to do something good for society, but they didn't possess our ability to actually promote a level of conversation or a level of sophistication in how they executed their mission, and they needed us to help them do that for free. So business consulting for social benefit, if you want to call it that. And I'll come back to that in a minute because it relates to the comment you made about Just Capital. The third part of our charter was when we saw something that was so dramatically bad for society that we had to activate, then we would take on the responsibility to stop what we saw was something bad happening in society. And that's why we did get so involved in bringing an end to the San Onofre nuclear power plant, why we fought for years to close it and successfully did so, and why we fought to close the one in Diablo Canyon successfully so far, it appears, and why we also from time to time have engaged in other projects that had specific goals. Like we wanted to get people used to the idea of solar on the roof. So for free, we would basically help people solarize. And we put millions of dollars of solar power on houses in our Santa Barbara County until the local environmental group, CEC, took that on. And now a second group, a Clean Coalition, has taken on. So once somebody takes on something, we pull back because we don't need to keep doing something just because we did it first. Our job is to basically be a catalyst. So let me return for a moment to the second charter, part of the charter. We have historically offered our services to nonprofits continually over the years. I'm proud of the fact that we were the founding organization for the National Peace Academy, which is now housed and giving graduate degrees and undergraduate degrees at George Mason University in Virginia. I'm proud of the 5 years I spent as the founding chairman building Unstoppable Foundation and spinning it into its own nonprofit, which today has helped probably 500,000 people in Africa. I'm proud of the work we did with Just Capital, which is the reference you made, because Just Capital was one of our main missions. It was mission 3, if you will. And Just Capital was the opportunity to create something, which we did when I was wearing 2 hats. I was chairman of the executive committee of the board for my friend Deepak Chopra, who's been a fellow of the Academy for almost 30 years now. And then at the same time, I was, of course, CEO, president of the Academy. So Chopra Foundation and the Academy, we came up with a thing called Just Capital. How to do what we did was sort of what I did. Deepak figured out how to label it. And then Deepak subsequently introduced me to some serious people in New York who were interested in knowing how to get it done. That would have been Paul Tudor Jones. It took a couple of years to organize it, to get it its own nonprofit status, to get Paul Jones comfortable with what he would do and what it would do. And today, it's 10 years later. It's an incredibly successful nonprofit. I hope you'll ask me questions about it, because what it does is it ranks the 1,000 largest companies in America, public companies, by how well they're doing at being just, J-U-S-T, all in caps. And how we determine what just behavior is we've now done over 150,000 separate interviews of people around America who tell us what they think just corporate behavior would look like. And we will continue doing at least 20,000 new interviews every year just to keep our data fresh. And for one other reason, the public is shifting. It's moving in positive directions in terms of what it is expecting of corporate just behavior. And that, of course, makes us very happy. In turn, the business community is acting more and more just every day because it's now understanding it's in its economic interest to do so. So we can talk about that.
So you're a little bit of the, if I can interrupt you a little bit, I'd like to, you've got a lot of stuff to drill down a little bit on here. One thing comes to my mind is think tank. I lived in Santa Monica for many years. Trying to think of Raytheon.
Rand Corporation.
Rand Corporation. Right.
Yeah, I work with them too. Yeah.
Well, listening to you talk, you're kind of a think tank all by yourself. Now I understand why you feel so comfortable with getting out of the way and being the midwife. Don't want to. Once you've launched it. kind of give us a little idea what a think tank means, because just listening to you, it sounds like ideas just roll off of you like, duck off of water off a duck's back.
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. First of all, I wanted to distinguish what it's not. So whenever you have a think tank that is wedded to a political ideology, that is no longer a think tank. It's an apparatus for communicating predetermined notions. So regrettably, I would have to put the Heritage Foundation in that category. Frankly, I'd put the Hoover Institute in that category.
I'm sorry, what?
The Hoover Institute is
okay.
also in that category. There are other think tanks in the country, and very good ones, I might add, that are like the Academy, committed to finding out the answer to really challenging questions to the best of our ability. That's what a think tank is. And then publishing the results. And everything, when you're a think tank, everything you start with is a question. If you start with a direction or a goal or an outcome, it ain't going to work. Because what you're going to do then is you're going to use your intellectual capability to prove a point you already had in mind. Whereas in a think tank, in its truest applications, you start with a question. What is going to replace fossil fuel on the planet? Because we know we have to. That's a question. So, and to use that as an example, I've now spent 20 years with that question. In the first 2 or 3 years, I ended up looking at every form of renewable energy known to humans and or even written about by humans. And that resulted in a couple of high-level senior executive seminars we did in Santa Barbara, at least, I'm going to say 20 years ago now. And we did a panel. In that case, we brought one of their organization in with us because a very famous guy named Amory Lovins, who you know of Amory, and who was running his institute at that point, was particularly interested in getting people to stop using incandescent light bulbs, if you remember 20 years ago. So we put together a panel, and because it was such a meaty topic, we actually did 2 panels back to back for a total of about 3.5, 4 hours, which was a lot for CEOs to take. So we put a break in the middle. And by the end of that panel, Mark, we knew we had a problem, because what we had just told all these about 300 CEOs in there and C-suite people, they didn't know anything what we were talking about. They didn't know that there was a problem called climate change. They didn't know that it was going to affect their businesses. They didn't know it was going to affect society. And they didn't know what all these renewable energy technologies were and how they could work. And said, oh my God, we got to write a book. So we then produced a book that was the content of those 2 panels. It took us a year or so to do it. And that was published 19 years ago, called Freedom from Mideast Oil, which I recommend people read to this day because it is a great handbook on renewable energy. And I started that handbook in the very first chapter. The very first subheading was called Titanic Miscalculation, where I told the story of the Titanic and the hubris that no one thought it could sink, so they intentionally didn't put enough lifeboats on it. And of course, when it sank, every human being that got into a lifeboat lived. Every single human being that did not get into a lifeboat died within 38 minutes. So if you were hanging onto a lifeboat, you were dead. If you were swimming, you were dead. You got into a lifeboat, you lived. Massive tragedy. And what I said is we're in a Titanic miscalculation about climate change. This is 20 years ago. And what we have to do is focus people's attention that this is the biggest question they have to deal with. And so we've spent all those years since then with climate change being one of our major activities as a think tank. Now, I'm going to tell you one last thing and quit, and that is at the last chapter of that book was the hydrogen economy. And people ask me to this day, did you write the book so you could make a case for the hydrogen economy? And the answer is no. I didn't write the last chapter until I wrote all the other ones. Because I knew till we got, and I had 2 great co-authors, by the way. I knew until I did that exercise, I did not know what the ultimate answer would be. That's a think tank. But it became apparent that hydrogen was the answer to the question I was asked, how are we going to replace fossil fuels? Once I knew that, then we developed a separate subcategory of technology on hydrogen, et cetera. And we could talk more about it, but we've gone on to our renewable energy group, published a paper 5 years ago, a breakthrough, what's called white paper on methane, which only now is being read widely and adopted, and which Dennis Bushnell, who's the highest ranking person at NASA that does climate change work, called me a couple of days after he got it and raved about how good it was and how accurate. And I said, great, Dennis, how do I get people to read it? He goes, I don't do that part of it. I just do the science. Good luck. And I got to tell you, until recently, it's been very difficult to get people to read it. But as recently as 10 days ago, I was asked for a copy by the chief environmental officer for JP Morgan Chase. Because the world of the business academy is business. I believe fundamentally, and this is what the academy believes, and this is what I believe with my career as well, personally, you absolutely have a duty, if you are in business, to take on those things that society needs. Because if you're not being a service to society, probably you shouldn't be in business at all.
Well, let's go back a little bit. Where do you get the passion for this? You're obviously, I've been in presentations with you for over 2 hours, and we didn't want you to go away. But where do you get the passion for this? Because both of us have had extensive experience. We've both done many of the same things. I wouldn't put myself in your range. You're way up there. But at some point in time, we have to teach others the passion or the way into. And it's one of the reasons why, at this age, I'm still working and still enjoying it, and want to keep doing more. And that's why the podcasts are around. How do you go about translating your passion into others? When you let them go, what is it that you're able to leave them with and help them understand where you come from? Because
I don't do that.
We've just touched on, in 10, 12 minutes, we've just touched on major things that I imagine that there's 20 more that we could touch on.
Oh, yeah.
What drives that?
So just one critical thing. When I launch them on their own, I trust that they will do what they are here to do. If we've done our job well, giving them that opportunity, they'll execute. Cynthia, who is the founder of Unstoppable Foundation, and by the way, I think somebody you should interview on the show. She's fabulous. Cynthia's passion is what caused me to get involved. And what she needed is what business people can do every day of the week. And she didn't know how to do, but she had the passion for helping particularly African children in education. We've built so many schools in Africa now, including we've built tons of grade schools. And every time we build a school, we make sure there's clean water nearby so that the girls can come to school and don't have to carry water on their heads. We supply the teachers and the textbooks. And then we make sure the village feels that it's for their best interests. We then built bunch of high schools, including 2 that are residential, because we found some of our best girl students at the end of 8th grade were being forced into young marriages or other things that we felt traumatic, having to do with some of the tribal customs that deal with mutilation, if you know what I'm talking about. So we felt, okay, we got to put something together where these girls can live and advance their education, and have to talk their parents into it, which is not always easy, particularly when we do with the Maasai. Our main target group is the Maasai in Africa. And so here we are in Kenya, and we got now 2 high schools that are boarding schools, and we're graduating these incredible girls, which we have been. And then recently, a year and a half ago, maybe 3 years ago now, we got involved just as I was coming off the board and I turned it over. We got involved with collegiate education as well in Kenya, so that these people could see their kids go through grade schools, in through a high school, and to a college, and end up being a nurse practitioner back in their village, or a teacher's assistant, or a teacher, or someone who teaches organic gardening, as an example. So from my perspective, it's not about me telling them when they go off on their own, go be passionate. My job was to give them the tools so their passion could find their place in the world. And that's the same thing with Just Capital. It's not that I talked Paul Tudor Jones into being passionate when I first explained what Just Capital would be to him. It's that I gave him a picture of something he could do that was so meaningful based on who I thought he was, that it would become the biggest legacy project of his life. And that's exactly what he calls it, by the way. He calls Just Capital the biggest legacy project of his life. And this is a guy, for those of you who don't know, for 27 years in a row has raised $100 million a year in a single night, every year, for the Robin Hood Foundation, which he started 27 years ago, and is the largest single donor group for the 5 boroughs of New York. So I don't got to tell Paul Tudor Jones to be passionate. What my job was to tell him what the opportunity was and what we could do to help him achieve it, and then let him engage with his passion, given the tools we would give him, which in that case was starting a corporation, getting a tax exemption, hiring the right people, getting the thing settled down until, okay, this is how you're going to do what you're going to do. And to this day, I'm extremely active, as you know, in Just Capital. And I will continue to be active in Just Capital as a participant on the team, even though I have a a lot of different hats I wear. I'm chairman of the audit committee and finance committee. I'm on the executive committee. I still do a lot of the nominations work, but I'm not running it. There's a crackerjack staff. We have a budget of $10 million a year. And what they're doing is they're giving me a chance to have let go of the execution on a bigger canvas than I could paint alone because they had the passion. So I just want to stop there.
So from a creative perspective, is the question one of the most important thing for you to get your juices going? I go back to our interview and you talked about vision and confidence.
Competence too. And competence also.
Competence.
Yeah. So, I think that the answer to that is the question doesn't get me excited. I start excited, and I can tell you in a second why. What the question is, it tells me what to focus on that needs to get illuminated. That's why I talk about getting out of the way. A lot of what I do is I try to illuminate what's possible so people can see it and give them the tools to build it once they understand it. But just like if you have an architect you really like working with and they help you design a home, when it gets done, if it's a good architect, it's your house. Right. It's what you wanted. A bad architect, you builds the house he wanted, okay, or she wanted. So the goal is not to get excited by the question. The goal is to get excited by the opportunity. Oh, here's Cynthia Kersey, extremely passionate about helping children in Africa and their families. Great. That's something that I can get excited about. What do you need? Oh, you need everything. Okay, well, we'll start with everything. Like, how do you start a corporation? How do you collect money? How do you get contributions? How do you get a tax exemption? How do you organize people? How do you hire them? How do you line them up? All those things that are details. I'm happy. I feel privileged to be able to supply through the academy, but it's her passion. And so the question isn't what excites me. It's the opportunity to illuminate something that someone else is ready to take a piece of what I see as our bigger objective at the academy. And as I always say, my wife gets a kick out of this. Every time I get somebody to pick up one of these and run, I go, one less thing I got to do. That's great. It leverages my time. So I'm really happy about that.
It sounds like you have a very good touch on being able to identify quality people, that vision, confidence, and competence. Is that something that's part of your own, your secret sauce, a little bit of your, intuition, your sense of good, I would think is.
I'd like to think so, but I'm not sure I'm that good at it. I think
sure attracted a lot of good people for the World Business Academy.
Yeah, but I'm a risk taker and an entrepreneur, and so I tend to wear my heart on the sleeve, as you know. I mean, first time you met me, he was the same guy you met 10 years later, right? I mean,
yes, yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I always tell people the good news is what you see is what you get. If you don't like what you see, we should stop right here because it isn't going to change over time. But I think to me, first of all, with my different degrees, the one that I think that has had the most impact on me in a positive way is my philosophy degree, my undergraduate philosophy degree. And in that, I was exposed, as philosophia, love of learning. I was exposed to the idea of learning when I was in college. And one of the people I really focused on a lot, who became a major force in my life, basically articulated a way of holding what this human experience is all about. So Teilhard de Chardin was his name, Teilhard, French worker priest, as you may know, not particularly famous with the Vatican at the time of his living because he was silenced, but he was an extremely forward-looking guy who was trying to figure out what's this all about, Alfie, to quote an old film. And what he came up with was, he said, the fundamental awareness is either you believe you are a spiritual being having a human experience, or you're a human being occasionally having a spiritual experience. I've always thought the former. So I believe I'm a spiritual being. And I've already caveated the fact it's not a religious statement. It's a statement about consciousness. to me, spirituality is being able to identify with all the planes of reality, which are not in front of your other five senses automatically, but which can appear in front of your five senses if you're attuned to watch for the spiritual. So if I have a gift at all, I think it is that I watch for the spiritual connection with everybody. If I see it, it doesn't matter whether I like the cut of their jib or not, I'm going to play ball. Unless there's something that I think is acceptable, which happens. But I don't think I'm a particularly gifted person in terms of observing, who's good and who's bad. I think I've been protected. I think there's a couple of ways I've been protected in that people have historically, because of the way I operate, tended to underestimate what I do and how I do it, which I think is a plus. Because I chose not to create the normal business accoutrements. I chose not to create the scorecard in my mind, where I would define myself as how successful I was by how many zeros after my balance sheet, my net worth. And I also made a pledge when I was 19, which I've kept my entire adult life, which is I never have gone to work on anything that didn't have a social purpose. So even when I do business things on my for-profit side, if it hasn't got a social purpose, I don't do it. Because I learned a long time ago that you make money doing anything. We only have one life. I mean, this is so transitory, the amount of time we have on this planet. I want to give it the best shot I got. So if I'm a spiritual being who's had the privilege of being given a human experience, I want to make sure that I do as much as I can to improve myself, which is a constant work in process. I mean, I am constantly learning about my own shortcomings. I'm a lifelong learner. And when you look at yourself every day in the mirror, as President Zelensky recommended people do if they want to really see who they are and what their life is about, what matters to them. I think he was referring to the UN delegation at that point. If you look at that person in the mirror and you think that there's room for improvement, you're probably on the right track. If you look at that person in the mirror and you think that person is absolutely perfect the way they are, that's a person with a problem. It'll show up one way or the other. And so I've been blessed with, a 40-year marriage. I've been blessed with far more financial well-being than I ever set out to create. But I've also, I think, confused a lot of people in the process, and I hear about it occasionally, because I didn't do the traditional thing, like take one industry, stick with it, and make yourself a billionaire, which is the traditional MO if you're good at business. My job has been to start things and move on. So as you know, I'm one of the three guys that co-founded the entire pay TV industry in the world, right? In 1972, me and two other guys. One guy was my age, one was a couple of years older. We had the idea of movies on cable for a fee. We thought we knew why it would work. We had to debug the technology because I often get involved with things that are technically complex. We had to debug the collection system. We had to debug a lot of things, but we did it all. I mean, I personally negotiated the first contract in the world for the exhibition of a motion picture, a major motion picture on TV without commercials. And that was with Hi Martin at Universal Pictures in 1972. And when I got that deal done, I got a call from my friend in New York who was then starting a company. The guy's name was Chuck Dolan. He had a fellow who worked with him. And they said, gee, we've been unable to get a contract for a movie. Would you be willing to give us your contract so we can go back to Hi Martin? So we whited out my name. We left the prices, Hi Martin, and the 10 pictures in the contract, and we sent it. Home Box Office signed that contract, and that was the first picture they ever got.
I never knew that about you, Rinaldo.
Yeah. So why did I tell you that? Well, because I was at such a fundamental place. I'm in the Cable TV Hall of Fame. I was there as in my mid-20s. I launched the pay TV industry. So I could have stayed there and got unbelievably rich because I absolutely knew what was coming. But my goal in launching pay TV was not to get rich. My goal was to change the content of CBS, NBC, and ABC, which I found dangerous. More dangerous than nuclear power, more dangerous than the fossil fuel industry. Those were the three I was looking at. And the reason it was dangerous, Mark, is because the stereotypes on television were numbing us into a level of somnambulance, of sleepwalking. We were building these incredibly technically dangerous tools in the day, and at night we'd go in and we'd turn on the TV and turn off. We'd tune in and turn off, literally. And so I saw our technology rising rapidly, but our humanity wasn't keeping up with it. And I felt if those two lines got too far apart, at some point they would snap. And the definition of a snap, when those two lines snap, is called nuclear winter. So you don't want people to go to sleep at the end of their workday. You want them to think. And they weren't thinking, because the founder of CBS had come up with a great idea called least objectionable programming. And that was, remember, and he told people, we are in the business of selling Coca-Cola. Don't forget that. So if the programs are too good, when we put the Coca-Cola commercial and they get mad at us, we fail. If the programs are too bad and they go to the other channel and they buy 7-Up, we failed. So our job is to write Coca-Cola on their mind. And to do that, we have to get them relatively brainwashed. We got to get their mind in a place that's empty enough that when we write the commercial, they don't even think about it. They go down the grocery store aisle and they pull the can of Coke. That was the foundation of the television industry in this country. Most people don't know that. Right? Now, why is that relevant? Well, it's relevant because when you look at the way to change that, as I did as a young man, how do you change the television broadcast system when they were talking to everybody in the country, and basically ABC, NBC, and CBS were all saying the same things? There were no black people on television. There were no old people on television. And all the white people lived behind picket fences and looked like Ozzie and Harriet. That wasn't reality. So how do you break through those stereotypes, which I thought were more dangerous, frankly, than the content itself, which was pablum? And the answer is you get people to care about what they're watching. Well, how do you do that when they're getting it for free, quote unquote? And then it hit me. Oh my God. The one
Rinaldo,
place where people go crazy with materialism is in the return department.
Let's go back a little bit. When we had our pre-interview, one of the things that you talked about as it relates to your enthusiasm and your creativity was consciousness.
Right.
And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking that, that consciousness, that force of social responsibility and a consciousness of what is going on. You're in what we did with the home box office, pay-per-view TV, was about helping people raise their consciousness about what they're seeing, how they see it, and what they do with it.
Getting them to choose, getting them to choice, getting them to wake up and choose. And we knew when we started that company that there would be a news channel. We knew there would be adult channels. We knew there would be sports channels. But I just want to finish this story because this was the answer to the question you asked a while ago, which is when you go into a materialistic culture, which has been brainwashed to be materialistic, you got to find a hook. How do you get them to care again when they've been told not to care? And the answer is you go to the complaint department of the supermarket or the complaint department of the department store. People buy a sweater and there's a hole in it. They get downright mad because they paid for it. And I said, the secret is get them to pay for it. If they pay for it, they'll demand what they want. That teaches them to choose. I might not like their choices, but at least they'll be choosing, and that makes them proactive. Now I'll apply it to your last question. Your last question has to do with when you've done that and you no longer need to do it because, and this happened for me in my career, not one, but all three of those networks were broken by the time I left the pay TV industry. So mission accomplished. ABC, NBC, and CBS were not independent companies anymore. I wasn't worried about the content. The cat was out of the bag. Channels were proliferating. Now I move on. The business model would say, no, then you reap the harvest. You go take a piece of all the stock you could own in all these different companies, and you start building more companies on companies, and you make more and more money. And that is just a trap. Because if you're really good at what you do, you can make money doing anything. So what's the next mission? What's the thing that it's worth spending the next 5 or 10 years of your life doing is the question you want to ask. And that's
where's that opportunity you're talking about?
There's the opportunity. That's right. Where's the opportunity?
Back to you a little bit. One of the things, again, in the pre-interview that I wouldn't say shocked me, but gave me a sense of a reality of your creativity. You said that something along the lines that you regret, if there was any regret, we were talking about what happens if, when we go, what's our legacy? And you said, I regret that I might not have done enough. But on the other side, you said something along the lines of, God, when it had to do with wanting to do, not just doing more, but I don't remember what it is. It was, you said, I don't regret anything that I did. And I thought of the confidence and the vision, and now the competence is that you're able to feel like that what you're doing is always going to come out somewhat positive or move forward or down the road or whatever. And that gives you the freedom to do the kind of creativity you have because
Well,
you're not afraid to do that.
yeah, well, I don't know it's going to come out right. I never know it. I never go in knowing it's going to. I'm a risk taker. I said I'm an entrepreneur, and the quote I left you with was, "Consciousness, which is what I work on, is no
Right.
substitute for competence." I know a lot of very conscious people that are hippies in the '60s and they never recovered. I mean, literally, they're my age.
Well, we're not so sure they were conscious. So, but
Well, whatever. I'm just saying, people can be very conscious but be incompetent. So you got to be willing to learn your craft. Like, if you're going to be a blacksmith, you better be a blacksmith apprentice first, and you got to come with the mind of the learner. If you're going to keep changing careers like I have every few years, then it's a constant learning cycle. But I never go into any one of these confident that it's going to come out all right and it's going to be good. No, I go in knowing I'm going to give it my best shot. I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to keep learning, and hopefully I can move the needle. And yes, I don't regret anything I did. I regret a lot. Well, I shouldn't say that. I regret a lot of what I did. I regret that I went through life so fast. I think I left a lot of people in my wake unintentionally, meaning I didn't spend the time I would have liked to have spent in normal human relationships with friends and the stuff that everybody does that I didn't have time for. So working like I have, 24/7 for the last 40 years, I probably have not been the best friend to my friends, and I feel bad about that. And I certainly haven't put the energy into normal social intercourse and activity. That said, I was willing to make that trade, and I don't feel bad I made that trade. I just wish I had done it otherwise. I also wish I had been able to watch more, maybe do a little bit less, and have been more in the being mode than the doing mode. But that's not something I was able to learn until fairly recently. So I'm still getting
how
my
would
head.
how would you describe that being versus doing?
Well,
What more would you have liked to have done?
everyone's trap is when they do something well, they keep doing more and more of it. So I'm a doer. So I'm the guy that's, no matter how many people are in the room, at the end of the day, if they close the door and they go, okay, who's going to do it? They usually pick me. And the reason is because I'm very good at doing, and that's a trap. So I probably should have spent more time as a teacher and as a student. I mean, a teacher in the sense of the Aristotelian sense of, someone who is a permanent student, where you're learning, or the Cardinal Newman sense of the university, where the faculty and the students are together enmeshed in a joint project. I think I would have been better doing that. For my own personal happiness, I would have been an easier life. It would have been less difficult. But that's not who I am. And as I made the choices day after day, month after month, year after year, I kept ending up doing things that required doing because I could see that they weren't getting done. And I felt a responsibility to get as many done as I could within reason. And it's only in the last 3 years I've changed that. I've finally learned my way around that, but it's been a long time coming. I like to say to my wife, I'm a late bloomer.
Well, I think a lot of us get that way. We could keep going on and on and on for another 2 or 3 lives, just trying to do that. One of the things that we talked about was life of service, and I think that
Right.
falls right into the idea that business has a service component to it, not just to itself, but to
Right.
To the community. In the work that you're doing with Just Capital, does the concept of the things you check off every year or every other year when you're interviewing, does service to the community fall within the
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh.
criteria? Can you expand on that?
Yeah. Okay. So I started giving talks and writing papers back in 1970 because I was offended by a guy named Milton Friedman, you may recall, was the principal financial advisor to Ronald Reagan, who created the theory of trickle-down economics and a lot of other things, and who basically has the theory he's best known for, actually, is called shareholder primacy, meaning, and he articulated this very frankly, the only legitimate purpose of a company was to make money for its shareholders. I thought that was wrong. I thought
That's Milton Friedman, right?
Yeah, it was Milton Friedman. And so I started giving speeches about that time. When I heard that, that was like a red flag in front of a bull. And I said, no, the proper purpose for business, which is a subset of society, doesn't operate independent of society, is to take care of all of its stakeholders. And so I started talking about a thing called stakeholder capitalism. Didn't get much of an audience for a very long time. And then about 12 years ago, it started catching on. So when we did Just Capital, I made sure that the primary zeitgeist, the energetic core of Just Capital, was stakeholder capitalism. That everything we would do, we'd look at it from that angle. So to this day, whereas I was not successful getting stakeholder capitalism to become a common rubric, Just Capital has. And that's how I look at all these different projects. They're a way to get leverage on my belief system. So I believe completely in stakeholder capitalism. It's very simple. You have the following stakeholders. You have your employees. I always put that first. I always call that being employee-centric. But what this whole avenue is called value-centric. Companies that are value-centric, I proposed many years ago, will do better financially than companies that aren't, which was somewhat revolutionary in 1970. And Just Capital is proving that it's true. Well, in stakeholder capitalism, the way we articulate it, you've got your employees. They're a stakeholder. You've got your customers, obviously. They're stakeholders. You got your vendors. They're key stakeholders because with employees, that's how you serve the customers. You've got the share owners, and I do put them in fourth position. And then you also got the communities within which you operate. In some cases, that's a community where you've got a store. In my case, I've had thousands of stores all over North America. So, big communities, little communities. But it's the bigger community I always talk about is the biosphere and all the people who live on it and all the sentient beings that occupy it. So that's my community. And I got to take care of the community called Santa Barbara that I live in. And as you know, I'm very active in Santa Barbara in a lot of different ways. So I don't ignore my local community because that's where we live, but I don't lose sight of the fact that my community is called planet Earth. And as I wrote in my column that you're going to see tomorrow, I think it comes out, I talk about planet Earth as distinguished from planet B, because I don't think there is one.
Yeah, I understand. It's interesting when you're talking about when I've turned around, re-engineered, over 100 companies, and the stakeholder concept is essential. You cannot turn around a company. I remember doing a presentation for Cal CPA, and I came up with 13. I really drilled down on them, but you're right. Everybody's got to be part of the equation, and it's always interesting that when you finish a crisis project like that, and then you got everybody involved.
Yeah.
2 years later, they have this tendency to want to go back to, bifurcating themselves and huddling in different areas and keeping information away from from the people that saved their buns, 2 years ago. So
yeah, well, that's because culture trumps strategy for breakfast. In other words, if you create the right culture, it will survive and replicate itself. You don't have to do it. And it's hard in a turnaround. So, because I did a lot of turnarounds just like you, and in turnarounds, you're fighting for survival from day one. Startups are the same way, but you're trying to build it with a culture that will live beyond you, because you assume that turnaround will be successful, and you'll move on. And you got to leave people behind who are going to keep the lights on, but hopefully keep the lights on with the same passion and insight that you had when you got the lights to turn back on after they got shut off. In a bankruptcy or in a non-supervised reorganization, which I used to do a lot of non-supervised reorganizations, although I've done bankruptcies too. And so the point of my story is that if you take the opportunity to have something execute a piece of your vision because other people are excited and it comes to your attention, you illuminate why it's an opportunity. You do what you need to do, whether it's a turnaround or a startup, to get that understood. And then you focus on culture. And that's always the hard part. The culture.
Yeah. Just a little bit of when we were able to get our revolutionary conversations in there and train people how to communicate, the companies lasted longer, the cultures went on, you can't babysit somebody for 10 years. It's whatever, but you got to start somewhere, and communication and cultures are essential.
Yeah, and just on this to end this point on Just Capital. So what we've now proven with our annual rankings, which we release every year, the companies that perform the best on our rankings, meaning they're the most just in 7 categories, and there's a cum total, are in fact the most profitable. So we launched an ETF a few years back. Goldman Sachs took it. We negotiated with them for over a year. And our ETF, we projected with our companies, the 100 best companies in America would outperform the comparative Russell Index. And every year for 10 years it has, significantly. Proof positive that stakeholder capitalism is a superior way to make money. So don't do it because you're a nice guy, although I think that's the right reason to do it. Do it because it's actually smarter. That was always what we preached. I don't try to appeal to people's the better angels of their nature if I don't have to. I'd like to appeal to their desire to get something to work and show them a way that works better than what they thought when they came through.
A good economy makes a good economy, and a good business model makes a good business model. I'd like to shift a little bit. Both James and Ann have questions for you. So if you're open, Ann has one right out of the box. I know she does. So you want to unmute yourself, Ann?
Thanks, Mark. Rinaldo, this has really been almost overstimulating to listen to. I've never had one of these go by so quickly. But when you're talking about, I'm really intrigued by the just companies, because where we live today, remember when we all watched the same 3 stations, and we had the same facts, and we had, the same information from which the deck was dealing from. And today I'm curious about your consciousness around social media and the world of Facebook and Twitter and all this enclave of information coming from often unreliable sources, and how that impacts you personally and how you look at them as far as being just companies.
Well, I'd go past unreliable. I would say downright intentionally dangerous sources. I mean, social media used as a tool of manipulation. And by the way, I wouldn't start with social media. I'd start with the facts that I never use the words Fox and news in the same sentence, because there's no such thing as news with Fox. Remember, you go to the foundation documents, they never claim to be a news station. They claim to be the mouthpiece of the developing arm of the Republican Party. And they have done that consistently. Now they're having a lot of confusion right now because they don't know whether they're going to support the Republican Party as it was or the party of Trump as it is. So they're having some confusion, as you know, and some fall off in ratings as a result, and some fall off in money. But bottom line, it was started not to be a news station. So let's not pretend it is. That's not. But putting that aside, in the hands of a murderer, a scalpel will kill. In the hands of a surgeon, it will save a life. I see social media like the scalpel. The problem isn't with social media, it's with us. It's those of us who are wielding it. Are we wielding it for harm, or are we wielding it for good? And we get to make that decision one person at a time, one post at a time. And I regretfully have to report that we continue to make worse and worse decisions in that way. And we are continuing down a terrible slope where more and more of our humanity is being compromised by our lack of willingness to rise to the occasion before us. And I predict, with a great deal of sadness, that we're going to go through a very bad time. What you think has been a bad time is just a warm-up, both in terms of climate change. It's for sure going to get a lot worse and a lot sooner than people realize. And in terms of social instability, and particularly the United States of America. And so I have faith we will ultimately come out in the right place, but I am very concerned about the pain that we are going to go through in order to resolve what clearly is a major human, and I would say spiritual defect we've encountered that we now must face in ourselves. How do we want to use social media, and why? And if the answer is we don't care, that's as bad as I'm going to use it the wrong way. To not choose is a choice.
Maybe it should become pay for social media.
It's becoming that, as you notice. It's sort of becoming that in more and more ways. And my thought is that may well continue to be the case, particularly when you start to see the breakdown in media. So we talked a second ago, I mentioned Fox. It has 2 major competitors now, Onan and the other one, although one's about to get thrown off the satellite. DirecTV is dropping them, I understand. But no, I think that with the increasing, like, let's take the numbers that the Republican Party publishes on itself. And by the way, I'm not a Democrat, for the record. I haven't been a registered Democrat for 40 years. I quit politics being a Democrat long ago, not because I'm embarrassed to be a Democrat. I think they do some pretty good stuff, generally speaking, but I'm embarrassed about the whole system and both parties. And I prefer to be independent, which is what I've been. So I don't have an axe to grind about Republicans because I'm a Democrat. My axe to grind about the Republican Party right now is it needs to recapture itself. I'm rooting for people like Mitt Romney and Lisa Murkowski and a few others to take the mantle back of what the Republican Party was when I grew up. Remember, I grew up in the days of the Rockefeller Republicans, which today would have no place in the party. In fact, Ronald Reagan probably would not survive in this party. So if the numbers that they put out about themselves, that roughly 75% of the base is Trump, or the party of Trump, and that leaves only about 25% left. And remember, you're only starting with 26% of the population to begin with. So if you're talking about 25% of 26% is left of the Republican Party as we know it, that's your problem. And that has to be resolved in some fashion. And I'm afraid that the way it's going, there will be violence in the resolution of that question. And there doesn't need to be. I think that if people like Mitch McConnell understood their long-term best interests, I think he might have done something different historically.
And I think you sent me a little note about Just Capital. Did you want to fill that in? Do you want Rinaldo to
Well, yes, I had talked. My question was about when you're determining being just. I was intrigued. Had the list of the 1,000 companies referred to? Does the list change
every month, every year?
Yeah. Do the same people stay high? Do more people take over? How does it change? Is it?
Well, I'll tell you, the best thing that's happening is companies that didn't do well the first year decided to find out how to do better the second. And so we've had a constant upward progression, which was our goal. So we don't shame the bottom 500. We celebrate the top 100, and we call the Just 100. And up until last November, it was called the Just Forbes 100 because Forbes was our publishing partner, and they would dedicate one issue a year, usually in November, to our rankings. And then they do stories about each of the ranked companies and why they were so successful. Today, that our relationship is with MSNBC, I'm happy to say, because we do more stuff with television now than we have a great relationship with Forbes. There was no animosity in the parting. It was just we needed to step up to television because television was having more impact than the published magazine media.
All right. Bye, Rinaldo. It's a pleasure.
James, would you unmute? Yeah. Did we overwhelm you today?
I started to get exposed to the word think tank when I was in the 80s, when I was in my late teens in the 80s. I remember when Ronald Reagan entered the picture with trickle-down economics.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, but I know you've run out of time. I'm just saying
the quick
right
version.
along the way from light bulbs to every other thing. I just can't believe it.
No, James, I think that you're right on. And I think it did change. And I think there's two reasons. One was a so-called Southern strategy, which was a radical political alteration, which basically said we're going to take the Southern Democrats and we're going to crack them because we're going to use basically segregation. We're going to use racism to attract them to the Republican Party so they stop voting with the Democrats and we'll take control of the country. Now, I'm not making that up. That is the so-called Southern strategy, and it worked extraordinarily well, and we're paying the price to this day, right? So number one thing that Reagan did. Number two, Reagan basically adopted a firm belief in the trickle-down theory. So if you look at what happened to the average person in America, their life has gotten worse every year since then. The difference between what most people make versus what the top makes has gotten more and more disproportionate. Lack of wage balance and income parity is incredibly insane right now. How can it be that the top 1% of this country makes more money every year than the bottom 95%? How can that be? And if you go to the top 2%, well, the top 1% makes more than 90%, the top 2% makes more than 95%. So the point is that we're aggregating wealth at the top in greater and greater quantities, And we don't see what's wrong with that. And if I were someone in the category of where I saw my life was being compromised, my ability to send my kids to high school, let alone college, when I saw the price of my drugs, particularly drugs that are life-sustaining, like for diabetes, go up to $1,000 a month from $35 a month. And I could give you example after example after example. The wealthiest, most powerful people in this country have abused their privilege, period. Now, does that mean you take them out and shoot them? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's time for them to wake up. So the vineyard I work in is called business, the World Business Academy. And so my goal is to try and get business to understand two things. Number one, in a time when politics is stretched to the breaking point and simply has not got the ability to lead us out of the mess we're in, business has to take up the slack. It's no longer okay to be neutral. Business has to lead now, whether it likes it or not. And its very future is at stake if it doesn't. Number two, and I think this is the most important part, we've got to go back, and that's why I call this a spiritual conversation. We got to go back and understand, what do we really care about? I think most people love their kids. I think most people care about their significant others. I think most people care about other people on the planet one-on-one. The problem is when we let ourselves get pulled apart through social media or otherwise, and we start seeing the other as the enemy or just as the other, we're in trouble because there is no other. There's just us. And that's the truth of it. And everybody who doesn't know that is going to pay a terrible price in one way or more during their lifetime. And I prefer not to pay that price, even if I fail in my goal to turn it around. At least I'll know I tried. That on my deathbed, I want to know I give it my best shot. That's basically what I told Mark in the preview. That's what I'm after. If I give it my best shot, then I can't blame myself for the outcome, even though I wish I'd have been better at what I did, because I think it could have been more effective. But now you learn things when you're 50 you didn't know when you were 30.
Yeah, absolutely. The opportunity wasn't quite there. So, Rinaldo, I noticed that you need to be going. I want to thank you very much. I know that both Ann and Don loved it. I could see some of their comments, and I enjoyed it very much. I also enjoyed very much the dialogue that we had before we did. But our pre-interview was fabulous. And maybe someday we'll have you back.
I'm going to quit on this note, which is that, I'm glad we did the Paris Accords, which without business, it wouldn't have happened, by the way. And I want to take my hat off, particularly to Paul Pullman, former, at that time, CEO of Unilever and one of the most outstanding business people on the planet, who really put the hammer down for business to get behind the Paris Accords. But the Paris Accords have achieved nothing. We've got more pollution, more damage to the atmosphere, the biosphere today than the day we were there. So if you wait for and COP26 has done even less. So my point is, I don't make the politicians wrong for that. It's a job they can't possibly win at. Politics is the art of consensus, and we don't have consensus. Business is in the art of making decisions quickly to get to the next step. So business, at a time when quick making of decisions is critical, has to lead, or it will lose its customer base. Because if the society goes, as I like to say to people, try selling anything but bombs in Syria. Not much good for business. Appeal to that. and hopefully along the way, they'll develop a spiritual consciousness that will inform them with the joy that comes with thinking at a different level.
Sure.
Require the second thing.
I don't want to deny them that either. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Listen, guys, Ronaldo said he had a hard stop coming up here. So, Ronaldo, thank you. This was fabulous.